I woke up and Bessie came in and she was 4 at the time, and she said, I can't wake Maude. This really weird feeling that something was very wrong. Walked into the bedroom and I could see the cot ahead of me, and I could see that she was, I knew she was dead. You can't believe it's happening, and you want time to go backwards. You think this isn't happening.
Welcome back to Crisis What Crisis, the podcast that aims to guide you towards a more resilient life and whatever it might throw at you. If this is your first time with us, then please hit subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. It really does help make sure these, I hope, useful conversations are shared as widely as possible. Joining me today, I'm delighted to say, is the award-winning actor and campaigner Jason Watkins, one of Britain's leading performers whose roles across drama and comedy on TV, film and stage have got us thinking, made us laugh, made us cry. He won a Best Actor Bafta for his role in The Lost Honour of Christopher Jeffries, played Prime Minister Harold Wilson brilliantly in The Crown, and stars in the series Macdonald and Dodds. On the big screen, he was in The Golden Compass, Bridget Jones, and of course, those hilarious Nativity films, along with many others. It's a result, though, of personal tragedy that Jason has taken on that role of campaigner. Following the sudden death of his 2.5-year-old daughter, Maude, on New Year's Day 2011, Jason and his wife, Clara, have worked to raise awareness around sepsis, the illness that took their daughter from them. In March, the documentary Jason and Clara, In Memory of Maudie, shone a very powerful light, not just on the tragedy of sepsis, but also the process of grief. We've talked a lot on this podcast about our failure, particularly in this country, I think, to avoid the subject of grief, or at least when we talk about it, to put some kind of brake on it. Jason and Clara's documentary doesn't do that, not at all. And if you haven't seen it already, please do seek it out on ITVX. Jason is now on our screens in the ITV drama Archie, about the life of Cary Grant, and his latest film, The One Note Man, has been shortlisted for an Oscar, the latest step in Jason's inevitable journey towards national treasure. Jason Watkins, welcome to Crisis What Crisis. How are you doing?
I'm really well. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's great to have you. It's great to have you here, Jason. I've been enjoying Archie. I mentioned a second ago. Astonishing early life of Cary Grant, from poverty in Bristol to world's most famous actor.
Yeah.
In a very different way, I know. But your own early family story, your dad's family story, is also quite astonishing.
Yeah, and I suppose that's one of the things that I've kind of... the things that influence your life, you kind of get used to them, don't you? And then someone says, God, do you know that's actually quite remarkable, that? And, I mean, I'm talking about my father, but Cary Grant, there he was, probably the most handsome man ever to walk on in front of a camera. And you think, well, he'd have no problems having relationships, finding meaningful relationships as well as not meaningful ones. But he obviously had a very complicated upbringing, full of rejection and confusion, but with a will of iron as well. I think the impression that we see of him on screen is very different from his life. And I think that's a very interesting thing that we all do in many ways. Sometimes we put on a show when we're at work and we're different at home and all those things, complex. And my father, he had a very complicated upbringing. He was born in Cleethorpes in Lincolnshire, but his mother, which I still find, so it was actually my grandmother. I always identify the story with him. Actually, it's to do with me and my family, and my kids. But she was a librarian in Eltham, and she had a fling in 1930 with the married librarian there in the library in Eltham, and I've been back and looked at photographs of it, and so she then went to a local doctor and said, I'm pregnant, and he said, well, why don't you just go on holiday? And he knew somebody in Lincolnshire, in Cleethorpes, who I think he trained with, and she was able to go on holiday, have my father give birth, and come back and carry on her life.
Right.
So, and I'd always thought that she'd gone up there, given birth, and just run back to London. But we've actually made made a documentary about my life, and it's all to do with the Tower of London. Sorry, I'll come back to the question. I voiced a documentary called Inside the Tower of London, and I'm not going to tell you the punchline, but I'm very connected to the Tower of London, unbelievably, historically.
So he was adopted?
He was adopted.
Yeah.
He was adopted by a couple, who lived and worked above a doctor's surgery. So, and I'd always thought that my grandmother had just gone back to London, but she didn't. She stayed for about 6 months, became friendly with the daughter of that family. My aunt, what I knew was my Auntie Muriel. And I think my dad was sort of had a talent and was, bright. And the doctors befriended him, and he was just the kind of the kid upstairs who comes down. And anyway, he got to Cambridge. He went to Cambridge, and and I think
was a scientist of sorts.
He was a metallurgist. So he did natural sciences at Selwyn College. So you say your dad went to Cambridge. I mean, there's not. I'm very proud of that, but we're not a kind of typical Cambridge. It's not from a sort of lower middle class background, and I don't know what class you'd call my dad, but his dad was his adopted dad was a chauffeur, and his mother was a cleaner. So
and yet he found his way to Cambridge.
He found his way, and I think it's a lot to do with the friendship and attention that those doctors gave him, which I find very moving. And I know that there's a Dr. Lavin Senior, who I knew when I was a kid because we went up to Cleethorpes and hung out and met them ourselves. Lavin Senior I found out, delivered my father.
Wow.
And so I find that all very moving.
It strikes me as an actor, right? You're very interested in what sits beneath.
Yeah.
The kind of true character of someone. Did that story, which I don't think you discovered until you were a sort of teenager, right?
Yeah, I think it was 15 or 16. When I found, and I don't know, isn't it funny what undercurrents inspire us and changes and make us behave in certain ways, and what cultivates our interest, particularly at teenagers, what people that we meet or ideas that we get, because we're still sponges really at that age, and we're still those things really go very deep. I was always really interested, and we used to, our house, you could look out the kitchen and look down onto the street, and we see these people walking up and down. I always used to think, what were they thinking? That was what was going on in their heads. And I think at that time, I knew a friend from school who was training to be an artist. He's now an art teacher, and I improvised this character home in front, and he drew me.
Right.
And then we did a load of those. So I'd go to RADA and I'd be doing a character like Hippolytus or something in a Greek play, and come back and I'd improvise that character and he'd draw me. So isn't it funny the things you do when you're 18? Nativity films are all improvised.
Yes. It's all part of
of this thing. So, if there's any lesson to any of this is to dive in and be interested in people and life.
Be interested.
Jason, embarrass yourself. Don't be so cool that you don't ask the questions that you need to ask.
Yes. Jason, you had dyslexia as a child. Again, the impact on you. You were a talented sportsman as well. I think you said a couple of chromosomes away from being, kind of professional football.
Well, yeah, Mark Hughes. Me and Mark Hughes are the same age, so
But you played semi-pro, right? And you trained with Wrexham
very briefly, yeah. And I did. I was in the Wrexham sort of youth setup for a couple of summers.
Yeah,
and which I greatly inflate the importance of. But
quite rightly, by the way. No, quite right.
But I was, 16, 17, yeah. And I went the 2 summers and trained with the youth team.
So you had these two things. You had the you had the sporting talent.
Yeah.
But you also were carrying the difficult, and obviously dyslexia, when you were at school, very handled and treated and viewed very differently to how it is now, thankfully. How did you find in terms of the decision then to kind of direct your life towards acting? How do you sort of pick that apart now? Those two things.
Well, I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was 17, I think, or even 18. So I'd gone through the whole of my school life, and and even now, I love books. I love reading, but I go to bookshops and I go, look at that book, and I don't read them all because I find it difficult to. And And so at that time, my father's clever, obviously, my mother's a teacher. They were frustrated. And I particularly, my father was frustrated. And, you know, you're lazy, you know, there was all, I mean, I wish, you know, they didn't understand what was going on. And so I did sport and acting and everything but reading and writing, you know, and, you know, my eyes would jump around and, you know, I couldn't concentrate. I mean, it's probably ADHD, almost definitely, I think. And I have talked to someone about that, and it's probably a lot to do with that. And I know that's a diagnosis which is sort of banded around quite a lot at the moment. But I think it's something that is a discussion that needs to be had about it. And
How did you feel when you were told that?
That I had dyslexia. Well,
No, the ADHD bit.
Well, no, it was a revelation
that's
to me.
More recently, yeah.
Yeah, that was a revelation to me, because I actually thought...
How recently was that?
That was like 18 months ago.
Right.
And we've got my children are clever and wonderful, and my youngest is, you know, he's bright and he's academically bright, and, you know, he was giving me this, said, "Oh, do you want to read this book?" And I'm not saying that my son is anyway ADHD or anything, but I thought that it might be him because he's so clever and freakishly could read when he was 2 and things like that. So I thought, and I thought that book was for me to read about him possibly, but it was me, you know. And it's, well, of course, I've given you the book, you read it, you know.
You were a very talented kind of mimic impersonator.
Yeah.
When you look back at that skill, do you think that was a sort of natural skill that you developed, or do you think that was a sort of coping mechanism?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think it was a natural skill that I had. I impersonated the whole of the cricket team. You know, I used to play in the men's teams, you know, as a sort of teenager. Then I one night in the bar or whatever it was, not that I drank at all, you understand, at the age of 16.
Of course.
But I improvised. I went through the whole team. I impersonated the whole team one after another as they batted, and all their little, you know, little idiosyncrasies and stuff, you know. And so that was, so I enjoyed all that. But yeah,
so it was obviously a natural skill. Was it one that you felt, right, that's it then, that's great, that's really useful as well?
Yeah, and
because it diverts a bit from some of the other difficulties that you were managing.
Yeah, and
right?
yeah, exactly. When you're 14, that it gives you a space to be able to be effective, and, you know, when inside you're probably feeling quite vulnerable and shy and all those sorts of things, and, you know, you mix that in with the sort of dyslexia, and, you know, my self-esteem and all that was not. I'm sort of classic extrovert introvert, you know. I think, I'm trying not to be sort of convenient with you, Andy, because you can wrap these things up in a ribbon, and it's always good to go in deeper, as you're saying, when you ask these questions about how I felt then. And like I say, oh, you know, I was insecure or whatever, but I mean, I was, you know, and I was always sort of struggled with that, and acting did become this place where you could stand on a stage, and I wouldn't say it's about control, it's about structure. There's a structure that had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you could sort of breathe in it, and people laughed, or, you know, they were affected or moved by what you did. So you were effective. So in a way, yeah, you dive off, you know, I'm a character actor. I don't necessarily use myself as much as other actors do.
But of course, there's this other side to the acting coin, because it is also the most insecure profession, you know, arguably on earth. It opens you up to vulnerabilities that most other careers and professions don't do. The process, particularly when you're on stage, that whole bit is interesting that so many people in your profession have a story of vulnerability that sits behind the drive towards it.
Yeah, and I think they're all true, you know. I think it's sometimes people think, oh, you're not really, because look at you standing on there, you can, you know, make 2,000 people laugh, you know, you've got to be super confident. But and same with stand-ups probably. And of course, I think that is the thing, that susceptibility to vulnerability, or that acknowledgement of it, or that trying to solve it, gives you the thing that is interesting when you're a performer, I think. And I think if you can show a bit of it when you work, that's the thing that audiences connect with.
If I can just quickly touch on RADA. You were part of a golden generation, really. Actually, you're getting into RADA. 2 questions there. 1, what did your dad think about your decision to be an actor, given that he's a scientist?
Yeah.
And then 2, the story of you actually getting into RADA on the day is sort of edged with tragicomedy.
Yeah.
Which, if you can, just quickly tell us that story.
Yeah.
It's worth hearing.
Yeah. Well, my dad, when I got in, my dad said, now you're joining the beautiful people, he said, which is like a really...
With a smile or not?
No, I don't know. I mean, he wasn't very communicative. I mean, he wasn't an emotional man, my dad, although he said he wanted to be a dancer.
Right.
If he had his... If he wanted, if he had his...
He lived his life again. That's what... Right, okay.
And he was a scientist. And so he was quite straight, quite Victorian in a way. And so... That's what he kind of... I kind of still can't work that out. I think it was... He had this idea of glamour. I mean, look at me, but it was like sort of glamour and, spotlights outside of cinemas on Broadway and all that kind of stuff. A bit like Cary Grant, really, probably his image of it all. Yeah. But, yeah, I know. We talked about the fact that I played a lot of football, at the time. And so... What happened on the day has probably got a little bit to do with that. I got my letter to get into RADA, my acceptance letter, and I jumped in the air of delight because I got in and landed on our cat and killed our cat. So
I don't know.
I'm hearing people screaming.
And I shouldn't be laughing either now.
I know, but the thing is, I know it is a sort of...
I mean, it
is a sort of joke, because, I mean, some people tell... I mean, I can tell the whole story. I mean, we talk about lots of... But, there's a whole routine to the story, as it were, and it becomes a story, and it's a terrible thing to happen. But, yeah, I mean, and my mum came down and says, what's going on? Because I was saying, stop it, I'd lost it.
I've got into RADA and the cat's dead.
Yeah, I've got into RADA, I've killed the cat.
Jason, so many roles. I'm sorry to speed through all this, but can I ask you, since we're almost certainly in an election year, just give us your performance a few years ago as Harold Wilson in The Crown was just fantastic.
Thank you.
Just give us a little mini masterclass, will you? How did you prepare for that one? How did you approach it? I just want to take that one example so that we get an idea of how you work.
Well, it's quite a good example in that it was... Probably think, you just turn up and they give you a part, or they say, would you play Harold Wilson for us? That was there were 7 of us up for that part, so I knew that there would be an amount of work that I had to do to get the part, and I really wanted to play it. Obviously, I had an appetite to play, so I did loads of research on him. I read books and I watched. When I say read books, I got information about him, and I read a very good biographical by Ben Pimlott, which took a while to read, but I started reading that. But essentially, a lot of it was just mimicry from watching him on video, but learning a little bit about his life. And
when you're watching that video, what are you looking for? I mean, it's the mannerisms, obviously.
Yeah, it's like when I impersonate.
But that bit about trying to find the bit that lies underneath, that perhaps is that you're looking for, but it isn't obvious to the rest of us.
Yeah, well, I mean,
what is it?
I can't say all. There was sort of 2 halves to it. Really, I did what I thought was good enough to get the part, which was in terms of my work. And then when we started with Netflix and Left Bank, then there was people to help as well to sort of fine tune it. But I'd done so much work to get the part. I mean, I think you're just looking at simple impersonation and what, body language, and I'm looking at you, and, you can find things that just sort of go in. And as I get older, I actually have less process. I let things happen. I've learned to leave things alone a bit. I think there's a certain amount of wisdom to that, is let whatever's going on happen and don't overthink it.
You played Winston Churchill as well.
Yeah, I did.
Are you the only person, do you think, who's played both Harold Wilson and Winston Churchill?
I'm trying to think.
You played Churchill in SAS Rogue Heroes.
Rogue Heroes, yeah. That was a little...
I enjoyed that. It was a great series.
Yeah, wasn't it a great series, yeah. Yeah, no, I couldn't resist doing that. They asked me, there was a version of doing The Audience, The Audience, which is the Peter Morgan play about the Queen, and there was an idea at once that I'd do all of them.
Right.
Yeah, which didn't... I think it was around the pandemic, or...
Right.
It didn't quite work out. But yes, no, he was a more extraordinary character. But yeah. So, but just one thing to finish about Harold Wilson is that once I actually got on the set and doing the scenes with Olivia, I think what was interesting also was that his vulnerability and that and I spoke to Lord Montague, who was Bernard Montague, was in the kitchen cabinet within the close circle of advisors that Harold had at the time. And he was a young man then, and he told me a lot about him. And I think he said that once he'd got into, for the last time he'd become Prime Minister, he sort of confided in Bernard. Bernard said, I'm tired. I'm just tired.
Yeah.
And he thought, gosh, for someone to say that. So that helped latterly in those scenes where he had got dementia and was starting to slide, which is with this incredible brain, to see that slip away was really tragic. And I felt I had to embrace that. But I felt in a little way, once we started filming, that I'd done too much work, actually.
It was brilliant work. You gave a great interview, Jason, on another podcast, Bandwidth Conversations, with Katie Brewer, in which you said that it hasn't always been, plain sailing as an actor. There have been difficult moments where you've struggled. You talked about the play Bingo, for example.
Yeah.
Just tell us a little bit about that and how you sort of react. I mean, it was anxiety, really, wasn't it?
It was. It's great. It's great looking at this, crisis, what crisis? Because here I am talking about my career now. How fortunate I've been, but yeah, God, that was really. Yeah,
you categorised that as a crisis.
Yeah, I mean, I've had when my first marriage, when Caroline, who we're very close friends, and Clara is my current wife is as well, so we do well. I had a bit of a breakdown, I think, when Caroline was pregnant for the first time. We lost that child, sadly, late on in pregnancy.
I'm sorry.
But I wasn't ready really to have, I was a child, younger than, I perhaps thought I was. And anyway, I had a breakdown actually, Ray, and over a weekend, and it was really hard, and I don't know what was going on, and I was terribly anxious, and I they gave me some sort of, I went on medication, which I hated, and I pulled out of it eventually. And I had another wobble, I can't remember when, but where I did, and it's all things all out of anxiety and not being able to cope and being overwhelmed. I think a lot of people feel overwhelmed. And I think that can lead to problems. And
the trigger for it in that first instance was yourself and Caroline losing your
no, it was actually the prospect of having a family and being a father.
Right.
I think that was what it was. Was I ready for that? And I wasn't a particularly good husband, put it that way. And I think I've spoken to Caroline about it. She knows, not brilliant father, husband. So it was challenging and hard, and it's vulnerable because, there's no guarantee of money. You're doing a job in Fringe, or you get a little part in a TV thing. We were living in a squat, I think, when we first got together. So it was difficult, but then when we got to Bingo.
So let's give a sense of the sort of chronology then. So between those two incidents, how
was 1995, 96, I suppose. And then I had another kind of wobble at one point. And again, I think sometimes when you're rehearsing a play, and you find this a lot, I think a lot of actors, when you get to the end of the rehearsal process, we think, oh my goodness, we're going to get on stage now, I'm going to have to share this. And I don't feel I haven't achieved what I need to feel comfortable on stage, which actually often only comes once you've done it. So, and they go, okay, it's fine. Sometimes you get it in filming, your first day's filming is difficult. You go, how the hell do I do this? Then you do it, you have a great day, and the next thing, here we are, I know this, off you go. But when you're doing a play and when you're young, it's like, my goodness, why, this is insane. And you'd go on. I mean, and I think that can contribute to feeling overwhelmed. I mean, I remember we did Are You Being Served? We did a sort of tribute kind of thing. And I played John Inman in that, and I absolutely loved it. And we had when is this? Maybe this is about 8 years ago. And I remember there was a live audience there. It was packed. And when you record those kind of shows, like a live sort of sitcom, as it were, they pump the music from Are You Being Served into the studio. So you can hear this music. And I had to sort of come on and arrange this sort of glove thing with this sort of grapes, making it that. And I could see my heart, I could see my shirt, I could literally see my heart moving.
And you've been on stage how many times?
Oh, hundreds of thousands of times.
It's just...
Yeah, and you think...
But it can just come.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and first nights are really... they say it's like having a car crash.
Yeah. And that's what happened with Bingo, right? But it was pretty severe.
It was leading, that was leading up to.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't talk too much about... It's unfair to talk about individuals or anything, but that I felt I really was in a crisis. I mean, I'd accepted the part. I wasn't working very much. We're now talking, this about 13 years ago. And I wasn't sort of doing much work, and I thought, I'm going to do a bit of writing. I want to write something. So I'll go down, do this play in Chichester, have a bit of spare time to write. But I kind of underestimated the play. My character had to come in the first sort of 15 minutes and have a sort of 20-minute, so it makes sense, like a 10-minute monologue about medieval farming techniques.
Right, as you do.
As you do. I mean, God, make that interesting, and I just didn't get it. I wasn't on top of it. We started rehearsing it and I wasn't there, and I couldn't make it work. And I think people were frustrated, the director and one of the actors, and I was taken aside and said, it's not good enough. And I just absolutely demolished me, actually, yeah. I mean, you imagine that you need... if actors are egotistical, which I think a lot of the times they are, it's because they've got to survive such really difficult, challenging things. And you've got your ego, you've got to be able to... I think I can do that in my work, I know when I get on the set that I can plug into various things. And part of it is just taking a deep breath and jumping off and not feeling afraid. You just
How did you pull yourself out of that one? Was that antidepressants again? Counselling?
No, it was counselling, and I'd had a bit of counselling about stuff, leading up to that, on and off, it kind of went away, and so I had a crisis in a weekend where I just couldn't cope, and I just sort of... Isn't it? I think it's amazing that how people can cope and cover. I mean, if you think about people like Gary Speed, for example, it's one of many men, and nobody had an idea. And I think when I was feeling like that, I was good at acting, that I was fine.
Did it get desperate? I mean, was it...
Yeah, I mean, I had those thoughts, I had those thoughts. And because I think what you want is you want it to end. You want the feelings of anxiety and stress to end. And I think
did you voice those thoughts?
No, I didn't. And I don't think I was working anything out as to how I might do it or anything. But I think for me, understanding why men and people, but I'm just thinking, I don't know, maybe I can just sort of know what it is anyway in me, that if you're overwhelmed, you can't cope, you can't see the future, that with a sense of ease or comfort, you're worried about the future, is that can slip into depression and anxiety. And I am much better at dealing with it now than I was then. So, yeah, it was really... tough. And then I went back and we started doing the play, and then I got, I felt more comfortable performing it. It really, I loved the theatre before then. And I've worked since, obviously, but that was my life really, the theatre. And then that really did sting me a bit.
By this stage, I think I'm right in saying, Jason, that you have 4 children. You have 5 children now. Two sons, Freddie and Pip, from your first marriage to Caroline, and Bessie and Maude from your second to Clara. If you can tell us, Jason, tell us about Maude. Tell us about those 2.5 years that you and Clara and Bessie and the rest of your family had with her.
Well, there's a kind of order to it in a way, isn't it? That I had 2 sons with Caroline, and I had 2 daughters with Clara. So there was a sort of symmetry in a way. And yeah, we all. It just feels a very different time, and Clara says, you don't remember much. Sometimes I do blank things out that I find difficult. But I do remember those 2 years, which were pretty wonderful with Maude. And, as we do now, we were sort of 2 families that do mix, and there's no issue. And that was great. And yeah, the fact that Bessie had a sister that would play and have fun, and, and I think I got into this, I had a lot of time with them, and together. So my wife worked, Clara was working at weekends a lot, so I would walk them down the canal, go to the Regent's Park, one in the pram, one on the little skateboard on the back. We did a lot of that and talk and play games and be silly and stop at certain points and look at the trains go by. So there was this unit, my unit with the 3, and then the white, obviously, unit with Clara. But I did feel there was the 3 of us was a thing in itself. And she was just full of life and sang a lot and laughed and was silly and wise as well. And Clara talks about this. She had a sort of wisdom to her. And she'd sing, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, like perfect pitch and things at 2, and sing on the bus. And so we had this little life together.
She was a performer. She was her
father, I think
she
so,
was her father's daughter.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. So that was lost, That.
It was just after Christmas, I think, in 2010, that Maude fell ill with what you both thought at first, which started as a cold, a heavy cold, but that you were led to believe you thought was croup, right?
Mm.
Tell us sort of what happened after she initially fell ill.
Yeah, well, she sort of had a croaky cough, like she had. I mean, we were joking. She had quite a sort of sexy voice. It was kind of sort of, sort of freakish voice, and almost, when she was speaking, it was quite funny, which in normal circumstances you wouldn't feel bad about, but maybe I do now. And so we'd taken her to the GP, and I was worried. We were both worried that the cold, the throat infection would go into her chest, which I thought would be dangerous. So I took her to the GP, and she referred us to after me saying, she says, just you go home and take some antibiotics. And I said, but I'm worried. Well, go to the A&E. So we went to the drop-in paediatric A&E in the local hospital, and were given some steroids for the throat inflammation, which loosens the neck and makes it more able to breathe. And so she was discharged from the hospital. Then they said, in 24 hours, just be aware in 24 hours, when those steroids when they wear off, that's the time to look again. So that following afternoon, that's kind of what happened, in that Maude had problems breathing. I went to sleep in the afternoon, which is very rare of me. And I think that was partly to do with the stress or the uncertainty of it, or the trauma that was starting to happen. And so she started to breathe really badly, and where her chest was rising and falling, exaggeratedly. It was called an anna, it's called a stridor. and that the symptoms were getting worse. And Clara woke me up and said, she's not well. And so she got into the car, and I was driving, and Clara was in the front seat trying to keep Maude awake. She was drifting in and out of consciousness. And this sort of hellish drive down to the hospital. And then I sort of ran in. Clara, I think, went back to look after Bessie. And then I was seen by, various doctors and into triage, and then a nurse, then a doctor on call who was saying, I think it's croup. And then the paediatrician who said, I think it's croup, or, it's something that's going to be okay, basically. But we were monitored and given gas and air, and she calmed down, was given antibiotics, and her temperature started to fall. But she was still quite subdued and floppy, and, but it was new, and that was New Year's Day. So, it was all in the lead up. So it was New Year's Eve. Sorry.
Yeah.
So it was New Year's Eve, and we were due to go out to a friend's house. And I've still got the messages, the text messages of sorry, can't make it, Maude's. And so, and then the doctor said, oh, okay, so I think we can discharge her. And I was thinking, well, are you sure? Because, we were driving a car, 60 mile an hour with our child drifting in and out of consciousness. Now you're telling me everything's fine. But you trust people, and you respect their decisions. And he made a decision that he thought was right at the time, that she should be discharged. And often it's said that, a child feels better at home and more comfortable at home, other than being in a hospital, which is alien and difficult. So, we took her home, and she was slightly better, and said, just put her down, not too hot, not too cold, keep an eye on her. So, which is what we did, and then we went to sleep, and she was okay, she seemed better, calmer, and we made our good nights, and she'd, Clara would always kiss her and then rub noses, and we were very concerned, and obviously stressed and anxious, but we managed to get to sleep, and we were living in a flat at the time on like a maisonette, and the bedrooms on the lower floor. And our bedrooms were next to each other, so Bessie and Maude were in the same bedroom, and we were and on New Year's Day, 2011, I woke up, and Bessie came in, and she was 4 at the time, and she said, "Oh, I can't wake Maude." And I had this really weird feeling that something was very wrong, and maybe slow motion started then, getting up, and there was a feeling of dread anyway. I remember this feeling of dread, but that everything's going to be all right. It's fine. It's fine. And I walked into the bedroom, and I could see the cot ahead of me, and I could see that she was, I knew she was dead.
Immediately?
Yeah, she had blood coming out of her nose and her mouth. So, yeah. And it's cataclysmic, and then it all
cataclysmic.
Yeah, and it all, and then everyone was crying and wailing, and it's horrendous. And you can't believe it's happening, and you want time to go backwards. You think this isn't happening.
And you do what you do. What
this is a
any
dream.
Parent would do in those circumstances.
Yeah.
You try to resuscitate her.
Yeah, we tried to. I took her upstairs, and I thought that I took her upstairs and I tried to revive her. I gave CPR. I did, I did all that I could remember, and got on the phone to the doctor. And I thought that was just me doing that, because I took her upstairs because I wanted to take her away from Bessie, whatever was going to happen. And to a certain extent, Clara, and in my mind, I thought Clara I'd stay downstairs, but it's only very recently that she was there watching me and talking to me and trying to revive Maude, which I did, on the living room floor.
Because you'd moved into a situation that is just beyond comprehension.
Yeah, I mean,
utter disbelief as well from both of you.
Yeah, you can't believe it. You just want time to go back. You think, no, this isn't right. This hasn't happened. This is wrong. No, but then the ambulance arrived, and they tried to revive her, and then we were told by one of the doctors that that was it, that we couldn't revive her, and she died. So,
but the first thing to say is just how very sorry I am, and I'm sure anyone listening to this is.
Thank you.
Is the first and most important thing to say. But I mean, you the documentary, the brilliant documentary that you and Clara made that tells this story, then also tells the story of what comes after a cataclysmic event like that. The horrible practicalities, the admin, if I can put it that way, of tragedy.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about that, but before we do, can I just ask, how did you even begin? Because I'm moving forward now through that phase, but I do want to go back there.
Yeah.
How did you even begin to emerge from that? I suppose is the question. Well, let's talk perhaps a little bit about having got through that phase that you bring to life in the documentary. How were you? I suppose. I mean, unable to work.
I
think is right.
I was
unable really to function.
Yeah, I tried. I was doing a play. I was in casting a play, and and again, I wasn't earning much money, really, and so I took this play, and I can't remember whether I actually started. No, I went in to rehearse, within a few days. I thought, we need some money. I haven't got any money. How are we going to do this? So I thought, it might be good. It give me a bit of structure. And I was trying. I was sort of acting, I was being a character. It was me. There was the thing I was trying to portray, and then there was the character I was supposed to be playing. It was, and I thought I was doing well, But what happened was
to turn yourself into someone else to be able to be someone else.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I thought, this is going really well, And I was becoming friends with the actors, just over a few days. And Dominic Cook, he's a wonderful director and very sensitive, gentle and brilliant guy. He said, would you come in on just come in on the Saturday, just have a little chat. And obviously, I wasn't giving them anything. And he was saying, it's unfair on those other actors because, they've just done that show in the Royal Court.
How soon after Maude's passing is this?
It's about 5 days.
Oh, goodness.
I mean, it's insane. I mean, the thing was, I thought, that'll give us a bit of structure, bring us some money, but there'd be the autopsy report or something. And there's no way that I'm going to ring up. I get a phone call saying, this is what the autopsy report is. I couldn't go back to ring up Clara and tell her. I need to tell her immediately. So I'd say, can I go out rehearsal and go and I should have been at home, perhaps. But, we decided...
It's actually, though, a protective instinct in a way that led you down that path, right? Because you're worrying about the practicalities of life.
And who knows what
But it is also taking you down entirely the wrong path in terms of your ability to grieve.
And you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Why would you know what you're doing?
Yes.
When my child dies, make sure you do this. Even advice that we give, it's tempered with everyone is completely different.
Of course.
And there are no steps. I don't subscribe to the 7 stages of grief. That it doesn't apply. I mean, those 7 stages individually might all happen at different points and over different timescales.
Yes.
But I don't think you can wrap it all up into a narrative of
there's no process.
This, and this.
Yeah.
At that time, certain things that people said to us helped us. Certain things happened that were dreadful. Practicalities were difficult.
But there was also the aspect of the inquest, because having heard the story now, this will all make sense. But you know, her cause of death, Maude's cause of death, I think, was given as strep or influenza initially, and you pushed for the full inquest. I think I'm right. So,
yeah, because
I mean, did you feel that there was a sort of sense of cover up? Was that too strong a way of describing it?
I think, I don't know, actually, if I'm honest, Andy. I don't know. An inquest, I'm dealing with this at the moment with another family that Clara and I have, we talk to other families. We've been various organisations and also reach out sort of personal, you know, there's a particular family who've been through something very similar very recently, and we had them over at the weekend, and we were talking to them, trying to help them get through. And so I know there have been real issues with that. But when I think back to Maude, an inquest is designed to give parents some sort of peace to the questions that they may be feeling, may want to ask. But an inquest doesn't point the finger at anyone. It just gives a reason why, or, you know, scenarios and what happened and who and when. It doesn't say, you know, why necessarily, doesn't give you all the answers. And it was designed to, Clara couldn't go to she just couldn't face the court. So it was too much. So I was allowed to give my account of what happened. Strep A, I wasn't there for the results of the post-mortem. I walked out, and that would be too distressing to hear. So, but it was streptococcus and influenza B. And the hospital trust had an expert who came down, who spoke. And he said that, you know, whatever was going on, it was too late. I think I'm right in saying, by the time that she was, it was already too late, that the hospital couldn't have foreseen what would happen. So, okay. So there's something unresolved in me about that. And
yes.
Maybe when I have time, I'd like to revisit that whole thing. And you're very, you know, you want it to be resolved. You want to go, okay, somebody tell me what happened, because then I can feel okay. I can know what happened. I can move on. But sepsis was not mentioned at all. At any time during the visit either time to the hospital, and not mentioned in the court case. So it was only after that I, you know, when I reached, that I realised, and I did a bit more research, that it was sepsis, and that the sepsis had taken hold, and that
it's about 6 months later, right?
You're
finally
was
told
6 months later. Yeah. So there's not knowing how your child has died is really difficult, because then you end up blaming yourself. You think, well, was this something that I should have done?
It leaves a gap that you will just fill with
it leaves
guilt
an
and anxiety and uncertainty at its lowest.
Yeah. And the peace that I have in that respect, that we have, is that, you know, it was sepsis, and that there wasn't anything that we could have done as parents. You know, if we had said, could it be sepsis, to any of the medical professionals at the hospital, that might have been something. And so that's what we always say to, you know, to parents.
And the anger in and around that.
Yeah,
we talk a lot about anger on this podcast. I mean, can I ask you, how did you manage that element, and I suppose the anger that then tips into, over time, into something akin to bitterness and those other emotions that are so dangerous?
Yeah. I smashed up the shower, remember that, in about week 3. And that was all...
out of nowhere, that was just...
Just like bang, I got in the shower, and it was about... It wasn't anger at any individual, it was anger at fate, and, you know, how dare you do this? What the fuck have we done? You know, why should we deserve this? I mean, and it wasn't rational. I mean, I'm saying those things, I was thinking those things, but there was some sort of outside body experience of smashing the shower up. It was about fate. Clara was just brilliant, because her anger at that and fate dealing this. No, it's obviously you're mourning for your child, and their missed opportunities and their life that's gone, and that and you're thinking that maybe it shouldn't have happened. Is there a reason that how has this happened? It shouldn't have happened. You're incredibly upset and vulnerable, and you feel bullied by the world. You feel bullied by the world. You feel knocked around, like put through a washing machine, and kicked out and spat on and kicked in the head. They don't care about you because you've gone through this, and then so you feel really vulnerable, and there's a sort of rage against that. I think that's what it is, and that's not a bad thing. You've got to find, and there are all these different ways of resolving and wrestling out of this horrible dark pit that you're in. Sometimes you feel like a complete victim and there's no way out and you're desperate. And other times you start smashing the shower up because you've got to break out and get on with your life. And Clara's brilliant because she didn't want to be one of those people who wears black and is on the other side of the street, and people say, that's her over there. She's lost a child. She would come over the street and say, this has happened. And she'll always preempt.
Yes.
And I did that to some extent. But I found that difficult, particularly at work, because you think, do they know? If they don't, I've got to tell them, and then we're working and they're going to go, oh my God, they're not going to be able to work. So it was difficult around that. But the anger, I was never angry at any individual. My anger was fueled into trying to work out better ways of dealing with sepsis, or even more than that, the way that we look at infants in A&E. I mean, because it's a funding issue, it's an organisational issue. It's another conversation.
Yes.
But because I had identified that there wasn't an individual at fault in the hospital. If it's not the individual, it has to be the system. So we've got to improve the system.
Yes.
So that's carried on, and my anger is fueled into that. And the bitterness, there's no bitterness. It's just, I think of the people that were peopled the memories of those days, and I could never blame any of them. No one willfully wants to, nobody made a technical mistake. It's just nobody really thought of the possibilities of what could be happening. That's what it's about. So my anger is channeled in that way. What happened over time is that I probably forgot to grieve. I was busy, and I still probably, I'm a little bit still there, really.
Because you threw yourself into...
Yeah.
Describe that early failure to work, totally understandable. But it wasn't that long, I think 3 or 4 months after Maude's death, that you're then throwing yourself back all in. And this time you are able to function, more than function, as an actor again.
Yeah. I mean, you feel...
And really threw yourself in.
I did, and...
Yeah. And that was when you look at that period now, that was also an element of kind of denial about it. Yeah, possibly. I mean, you've got to sort of... I remember being in the car going, right, I'm going to get my family through this. It was like born again. You get sort of born again, and you have this sort of 2 days of that, and then bang, you're just like lying on the bed again, and you can't cope. I mean, the two things that I think are really important to say before I just talk about working again was that in that period, when something awful like that has happened, something cataclysmic in your life, we felt as though we were in this dark pit. I probably talked about this before. And if anyone's heard this before, me say this before, then just please sort of rethink it again. You feel as though you can't get out of a pit. It's quite visual, and it's quite sort of sensual. You're so deep, and that you can see the lip of the pit with the sky above, and you just can't get out. If you're feeling that, all I would say is that one day you do get out. You do. And the other, even though if you're in recent crisis, you feel that it's impossible. I'm not saying time heals. I'm not saying any of that. I don't believe in those sort of things. There's a process that happens that
can take long or short, where you do arrive somewhere that you can be at peace. Another thing is that, you know, the Maude's death was sort of all-encompassing. And it's like a big disc in front of you, a big red dot that's all black dot that's right there. And then gradually, over time, it's still in the centre, but it gets smaller and you get to look out and see your family and find a way forward. So I always kind of say that, even though, you know, if there are people listening to this who've just been through a bereavement swearing at me, thinking that that's fine, because that's all part of it. But all I'm saying is that the physical feelings of desperation and also things like, you know, you feel your hands, you feel your child's hand in yours when they're not there in those first few days and weeks, and it's really awful. And I remember going into, you know, a shop in Brent Cross trying to get clothes for Bessie, and then I found myself sort of staring at a 2-year-old's jumper and lost it there. You know, all those feelings are all part of this journey. And I would say is that, you know, if you're having those feelings, that things get less difficult. They do. But when I started work, that you know, Rough Cut television company, Ash Taylor, and well, I really thank, you know, he cast me in it, you know, and the guys did, you know, in Trolleyed, you know, which is a comedy, of course. Yes. Of course, it was a comedy in a supermarket in Bristol, but it did take me away from home. But it gave me money as well, you know. That was the thing, and it was good money, sort of for the first time, really. I think actually, proper money.
Right. So it ticked the I'm looking after my family box.
I could look after the family, and I was back every weekend, and you know, and Jane Horrocks, who I trained with at RADA, part of this golden, which included like Ray Fiennes and Ian Glenn and Imogen Stubbs, and all sorts of lovely people who weirdly we've reconnected 40 years later. Actually, we're all sort of have this chat group anyway.
Wonderful.
Another story. But Jane really looked out for me, you know. I think through that time, and I was able to feel like I provide and start work again. Because you think, how the hell am I going to work?
You made that brilliant documentary that we've touched on earlier in the conversation last year. It's very powerful television, but it's also I think very important television, not just because it tells Maude's story so beautifully, heartbreakingly, but also for the way that it sort of opens a window into your family's grief and into the sort of process of grief. You confront it all. We see you retrace your journey to the mortuary. We see you in a therapy session with Julia Samuel, who's been lucky enough to have had her on this podcast, an amazing woman. You talk about your misplaced sense of guilt. You clearly felt strongly, you and Clara clearly felt very strongly that that's the documentary that needed to be made. Right?
Yeah, I'd always wanted to do something about it, and Clara had as well, and there was, I had thought at one point that it would be more allegorical, that we could do a drama about it, about grief, not about our story, because that would be the only way of actually exploring it, because it would be too difficult. I've not ruled that out actually at all as an idea. But we had wanted to tell the story. It's weird, isn't it? Because you feel sort of guilty about, you know, I don't know, perhaps I feel selfish that I'm able to tell the story, our story, because I know there are so many other families that can't and don't have the platform or don't have the ability or I mean, sharing is important.
Critical.
Yeah, it's really important because, and for the person who is sharing, it's as important for us as it is for the listener. We're trying to help people, but there is a selfishness about sharing. I mean, maybe I'm overthinking this, but there's a privilege to being able to share, and it's altruistic. And maybe it's a privilege that you need to value and make well, because not everyone has the ability. Because I know that by sharing, it's helped us. Not completely. It's been really hard, and I know some people don't have that ability to share. All I would say is that, you know, just talk to people. That is what sharing is. We've just done it on a different
Doesn't have
platform.
to be a documentary.
No, just talk, and get it. However difficult it is, I suppose we've done it on a bigger scale, and because we're actors, we do share our emotions when we work, and I think it's a bit to do with that we are able to talk openly about it. There are a couple of times where I thought, do we want to share that with an audience? But my feeling was that by sharing it, that it would help them. It would help people. I mean, it might help us. I mean, some bits I thought, has that really helped, sharing that bit?
Where have you ended then on that?
Completely the better that we've shared it. Yeah. You know,
there's no question it's been helpful for others. No question.
Yeah.
But in terms of your grieving process,
what it's reminded me that I have to make sure that I do touch those places that I've kind of maybe don't want to open up because. That's part of the story of the documentary, right? It's you confronting the bits that you feel actually. And in the session with Julia, you know, she made me think. We went back part of as we've done today, going back to that day, and it was only when we did the documentary that I realised that Clara was in the room with me while we were the awful resuscitation. I was trying to resuscitate. Yeah. And that. Yeah, because you just want to run away. I mean, let's say, put it this way, you know, if I'm an actor who likes to run away into different characters, sometimes if you've got a really big emotion, you want to run away from it, you know. It's better to face it. And you can do that gently. You don't have to be Superman. You can just be, okay, today I'm going to go back to that moment. Today I'm going to really think about that. It's going to be painful, but it's going to be good for me and good for us, you know. Whenever Clara and I went to our early sessions with the SLOW group, which is a group of parents who meet and
lost
talk,
children,
the lost children, thank you, yeah. We'd come back on a Wednesday afternoon and we'd just be knackered, be shattered, and just lie on the bed but we felt very close. We do feel close when we talk about it. We share the same experience. It binds us, you know, and that doesn't happen a lot. It doesn't always happen with couples because sometimes it's easier that the trauma of what's happened, it's better to have a new relationship, leave that behind, move on. And
that's quite a familiar pattern, isn't it? Post the loss of a child. Yeah.
And yet the person who's with you, who's been through it, they're the person who can help the most. Yeah. But I completely understand.
The documentary also, of course, highlighted the truth about sepsis. The statistics alone are shocking. 50,000 sepsis deaths a year in the UK. So it shone that light on as I described. That was obviously a big motivator for you as well. I mean, you've talked about it. That is now where you're channeling so much.
Yeah, and
effort, work, energy.
Yeah, and you know, we're patrons of the Child Bereavement UK. You know, where we try and help in people come to terms with losing their child.
On sepsis, if there's one message that you would want to share in this conversation around, you know, the awareness piece
for parents and for perhaps the elderly as well, you know, if your parents are older and you're worried about your mother or father or elderly relative or your child, it's just ask, could it be sepsis? You say, even at the GP, when you meet GP, or even, you know, first responders, you know, they, in certain instances, they're, in certain trusts, you know, they're very on top of it. As of, you know, well, ambulance people, basically, what I'm saying is that they can be au fait with the idea that sepsis may be happening at that point, or is the possibility of it. But just ask, could it be sepsis at any time? And ask them to rule it out. And, you know, Martha's rule, which, you know, it was a recent case of, you know, Martha, a girl called Martha died, and her mother, Maripy, pursued an idea of getting a second opinion in a scenario in hospital where you're worried about your child, that you can demand second opinion from another individual, which is brilliant. And tied in within that is to say, just say, could this be sepsis? I'm worried about this. Rule it out for me.
Use the word.
Use the word. Raise it. Because, you know, I'm a very good friend with a professor of A&E, right? And he's explained to me many times, sepsis is part of a scenario of many things. With an infant, when an infant arrives at A&E, it's difficult. Sepsis is an issue because it's difficult to know when to act upon it. You can recognise, or you can see if you recognise there are certain signs, then it could be sepsis. So I'm not explaining this very well, but for me, the whole of looking at infants arriving at A&E needs to be looked at again.
Yes.
Because if I say that Maude died 12 years ago, and that the Ombudsman report about sepsis a couple of months ago said that nothing had changed about sepsis. Now that was like a body blow. Makes me feel sick even thinking about it now, because we've worked so hard over that time, and also this case. There was one case a few years ago about a young boy, Connor Horridge, up in Wigan, who died in almost the same way that we'd lost Maude. And recently a boy called Daniel at the Royal Free Hospital died. It's a catalogue of cataclysmic mistakes, and they're the parents that we're talking to, and they are devastated by that. And it's the similar scenario. So why is sepsis this massive? Why can't we just treat it? Why can't people be on top of it? Well, I think it's because the whole of A&Es needs to be subsidised, and there needs to be a sort of reevaluation of how we.
It's also about accountability and fear as well.
Yes, but it is. Yes, but yeah. And also, that there needs to be a national database of sepsis cases, but there can't be a national database of sepsis cases because all the individual trusts work in different ways. So when the NHS was starting to be broken up and it was privatisation moved in, that various trusts have different systems to communicate. So you do a deal with some company in one trust, you work up a communication system. That you can't work with another trust.
Exactly, it's right hand, left hand.
So you can't.
Yeah.
So I'm not just saying state control good, privatisation bad. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that we have this fantastic goodwill about the NHS. We've got to subsidise it. We as individuals have to say, actually, okay, I value this. It means that we're going to have to ring fence it in a tax situation, or we're going to have to pay for it. And part of that payment would be to really support infant A&E and give it what it needs to provide the services that that some A&E departments have dedicated sepsis nurses, some don't. So what's that about?
Yeah, you either need them or you don't.
Yeah, you need them.
Jason, what we're going to do is include all the right links on this episode so that people who I hope they will want to kind of understand this a bit better and get behind the campaign that you've so brilliantly got yourself involved in. We'll make sure that is all available. In 2015, you were rightly celebrated for your role in The Lost Honour of Christopher Jeffries. Incredible portrayal of a man facing an existential and brutally unfair crisis. A key part of that story, I think, took place on the day you lost Maude. Something that was obviously right at the front of your mind, I suspect in a very visceral way, on the day that you were filming.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that day?
Yeah, so this is where my dyslexia comes in, partly, because when I remember images of Christopher Jeffries in newspapers at the end of 2010, and then it just disappeared because Maude died. So there's just
Of course.
So and then when we started filming, I kind of realised that this is the day that Christopher was accused of murdering one of his tenants, Joanna Yates, in Bristol, and he was taken in for questioning, and he had to stay overnight. They asked for an extension, and he had to stay in overnight in a cell. And I worked out that on that night, that was the night that Maude died. He was in overnight on New Year's. So that scene, that was weird, realising that. It was sort of strange. And brought it back. And I was so determined in that job. That was a sort of grief project without knowing it. I was determined to be the best that I could be. Just, I don't know, something took over, and I just had to be, it just had to be great for me, for Joanna and her family, and for Christopher, and for Justice, I suppose. But there was this sort of, the planets aligned, and I was just going to go for it. And I really enjoyed making it. But there's something else was going on. And one of those things was on that night, realising, oh God, this is the same night that... And of course, it was all linked, you know, my...
That could have tipped you either way.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
Yeah, I mean, well, what happened was that then in another scene, we go through the... Christopher comes out and says, oh, what's been going on since I've been in? And his friend shows him all the newspapers and how much he'd been demonised in the newspapers, and they prejudged him and so on. But sharing the headlines was the flu epidemic. So on every newspaper that we turned during the scene, so we start rehearsing it, and we look at all the newspapers are in a pile, and Ben Kaplan, who played Clive Panto, who was Christopher's friend, puts the newspapers down, and then I start looking at them. And Roger, my lovely late friend, Roger Michel, said, oh, you know, I sort of just slumped, and he said, said, bear it, which is one of the best notes. You bear adversity, you know. In a crisis, you don't always crumble, as we know. I think you do, but sometimes you have to bear it. And Christopher was a bearer of, he was strong enough to bear it. So, but as we were doing it, looking at the other headlines, these were the real newspapers, obviously, of the time. They shared it with the flu epidemic that took Maude, really. And so I did fall apart then. And I went over to Roger and I hugged him. And I said, can we just cover the newspapers up? And he went, oh, God, yeah. So, you know, we managed to do the scenes, but we got rid of the newspapers because I didn't want to see it anymore. I found it really hard.
Yes.
But I remember saying to him, we're writing our novel here, aren't we? We're writing a novel, and I it sounds too conceited, but I just felt that this was my life's work.
Yes. This
was part of my life, and all that had happened to me. This was where I was showing it, you know? And so, for it to have worked and to get a couple of awards out of it,
worked.
Nice.
You won the Best Actor Bafta that you dedicated to Maude.
Yeah, I'm dedicated to Maude. Yeah. Because it was all part of, you know.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
No.
Jason, thank you.
Sorry.
No, look, you know, I said it earlier, I do want to say it again. Thank you so much for telling us what I know is such a difficult story, but one that I know you also feel very strongly. It's why you're here, right? It's going to be helpful for anyone who's dealing with the loss of a child or a loved one. But on my behalf and their behalf, I would like to say again how sorry we are for your and your family's loss.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today. It's been what we call a proper conversation.
Well, it's great to have a proper conversation. I really hope it.
And thank you for
helps
it.
people.
If you've enjoyed this conversation with Jason, please do give us a rating and a review. It really helps. And if you hit subscribe wherever you download your podcasts from, you will find a lot more useful crisis conversations. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and you can watch the full episodes on YouTube. Just search for Crisis What Crisis podcast. You can also find full transcripts of this and every episode on our website, crisiswhatcrisis.com. Thanks again for listening.